Amnon said to Tamar, bring the food into the bedroom that I might eat from your hand. So Tamar took the cakes which she had made and brought them into the bedroom to her brother Amnon. And when she had brought them to him to eat, he took hold of her and said to her, come lie with me, my sister. Now there's a lot of things here going on. First of all, this demand of Amnon to Tamar is sort of reminiscent of Potiphar's wife. If you remember her demand toward Joseph back in Genesis, it was this insistent idea that she would come into the bed with him, and it also shows he knows that this is his sister. He even addresses her as my sister. He knows the relationship. He knows that this is a sinful relationship. She responds by quoting scripture to him. She answered him, no, my brother, do not violate me, for such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do this disgraceful thing. And as for me, where would I get rid of my reproach? And as for you, would you be like one of the fools you would be like one of the fools in Israel. Now, therefore, speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you. So she works out, she tries reasoning with him. She tries to plead with him, kind of reason with him. She first kind of quotes scripture to him this is a quote from Genesis, or sort of at least a paraphrase from Genesis 34 and verse 7. In that instance, if you remember, this was the rape of Dinah by Shechem, and over there in chapter 34 and verse 7, now the sons of Jacob, when came in the field, when they heard it, men became grieved, and they were very angry, because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing ought not be done. So what you see here from her is virtually a paraphrase, or virtually a direct quote even, of this passage. Apparently, they were familiar with the Old Testament stories. They were familiar with this story out of the book of Genesis, and she quotes this to him to point out this is a disgraceful thing. This is an evil thing. She goes on to say in verse 13, how do I get rid of my reproach? And so she's trying to make the argument of, look, I'm going to be basically a ruined woman. And do you want, is that your view of me? You want me to be ruined in the sight of Israel? You want me to be ruined like this? It's basically, first of all, think about me. And second of all, think about you. Think about your reputation. What will happen to you? She says you will be as one of the fools in Israel. And the literal translation of that phrase, that's disgraceful one, the literal translation is you will be one of the disgraceful ones. You will be disgraced. It will be known, and you'll be cut off. You'll be cast out of Israel, as it were. And she's trying to reason with him. She's trying to persuade him. She even suggests in verse 13, therefore, please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you. She suggested that David would allow her to marry. Well, again, some of the scholars think she's perhaps playing for time here a little bit, because it's likely that both of them know the law, that she's not to be married to him, that this is incest, and they're not going to be married. But she's perhaps playing for time, thinking, well, maybe if I can get David involved, maybe if I can get a little bargain for time here and argue for that, I can have a chance to get away. Well, of course, this fails. It says in verse 14, however, he would not listen to her. Stronger than she, he violated her and lay with her. It says, and so he commits this deed. He commits the rape on his sister this way. In spite of her protests, in spite of her pleading with him to control himself and to point out the consequences of what's going to happen, he won't listen. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. The children, the children are fully aware of what's going on. They fully know what has happened with David and with Bathsheba, and you can understand the by setting up that example, David has left this legacy for his own children of, well, just basically do whatever you feel like doing, because in the end, there's no consequence. That's the attitude. There's no consequence. Yeah, yeah, that's yes. We see then the consequence. Then it says, then Amnon hated her with a very great hatred, for the hatred with which he hated her was far greater than the love with which he had loved her. Well, again, so many of the scholars would point out, they're going, there's no love. There was no love here. There was lust, there was desire and lust, but there was no love, because that love would have um, caused her to care for her well-being more than his own. And obviously he had nothing like that. He had no sense of her well-being. He had no concern for her well-being. And so the fact that this love that's mentioned here, again, it's not love, it's a lust. It's just simply an animal lust. He wants nothing more to do with her now. And Amnon said to her, get up, go away. Basically, get lost now. I'm done with you. But she said to him, no, because this wrong in sending me away is greater than the other you have done to me. Yet he would not listen to her. Then he called his young man who attended him and said, now throw this woman out of my presence and lock the door behind her. Now she had on a long sleeved garment, for in this manner the virgin daughters of the king dressed themselves in robes. Then the attendant took her out and locked the door behind her. And Tamar put ashes on her head and tore her long sleeved garment, which was on her head, and put her hand on her head and went away, crying aloud as she went. Um, by throwing her out of the apartment, again, he had already sent all of these servants away to get away from his apartment. So that means in order to call for this young man, he would have had to maybe gone out into the hallway or something and start calling for one of his attendants to come and help him, and brings this attendant back and now orders this woman to be out. He adds insult to injury by locking the door behind her. What's the purpose of locking the door behind her? Well, the idea is that she's going to try and break back in as if she has done something wrong. You see the attitude that he has. Well, now here he has done this great harm to her. He's raped her. He's now throwing her out. And again, lock the door behind her. Why? To basically try and shift the blame onto her, as if it's somehow her fault. And you see that that behavior. It's an incredibly arrogant behavior. She says she takes this long sleeve garment, and the daughters of the king who were virgins, they would wear this garment. Josephus tells us it was tied at the wrists and let down to the ankles to cover up even the inner garments. It would have been like I don't know. You ladies would know more about what it might look like. I tend to think of some kind of like a full slip or something like that, but it might even have been more covering than that as far as a garment. But it was intended to show chastity. It was intended to show modesty, and was worn as an emblem of modesty. And she tears it to indicate that she's been attacked. She puts these ashes on her head. Of course, ashes on the forehead was a sign of mourning. So obviously she's obviously in mourning for what's happened to her. And it says she covered her face with her hand. Um, it's likely that Tamar, or that rather Amnon, has taken her veil, and so she has nothing to cover herself with, and so she only can cover herself with her hand, cover her face with her hand as she goes on her way. Um, this next, verse 22, verse 20 rather. Then Absalom, her brother, said to her, "Has Amnon, your brother, been with you? But now keep silent, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this matter to heart." So Tamar remained and was desolate in her brother Absalom's house. Now, when King David heard about these matters, he was very angry. But Absalom did not speak to Amnon, either good or bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had violated his sister Tamar. This question that Absalom asks, he sees her with her garments torn, with ashes on her head. He immediately apparently jumps to a conclusion, and we might wonder about how he came to that conclusion. And the answer might be that maybe that Amnon is known for some kind of lewd or licentious behavior. And basically one look at Tamar tells Absalom the entire story of what's taken place, of what's happened. And Absalom is enraged, of course. Tamar, it says, is desolate in her house. She is an unmarried woman who is no longer a virgin, unmarried and childless. She is essentially an outcast within her own society. The sense here is that essentially no other decent man would have her to be a wife. We don't know that she ever married. We have no record, I think, that she ever married. We see that David, of course, is angry. He's angry against Amnon, but now what's he going to do? Because he's kind of in a corner because of the consequences of his own sin. He's had his own sinful conduct with Bathsheba. He deserved to die. We already pointed that out. He deserved to die for what he had done with Bathsheba and what he had done in regard to Uriah the Hittite. But now, how's he going to now turn around and execute justice upon his son Amnon? Who deserves to die? We look over in Leviticus chapter 20 and verse 17. Says if there's a man who takes his sister, his father's daughter, or his mother's daughter, so that he sees her nakedness and she sees his nakedness, it is a disgrace, and they shall be cut off from the sight of the sons of his people. He has uncovered his sister's nakedness, he bears his guilt. Over in Deuteronomy 22, Deuteronomy 22 and verse 25, starting verse 23. If there's a girl who is a virgin engaged to a man, and another man finds her in the city and lies with her, then you shall bring them both out of the gate of that city, and you shall stone them to death, the girl because she did not cry out in the city, and the man because he has violated his neighbor's wife. Thus you shall purge the evil from among you. But if in the field the man finds a girl who is engaged, and the man forces her and lies with her, then only the man who lies with her shall die. You shall do nothing to the girl, for there is no sin in the girl worthy of death. This is for just as a man rises against his neighbor and murders him, so is this case. When he has found her in the field, the engaged girl cried out, but there was no one to save her. And so, at the least, Amnon is subject to banishment. And at most, he is subject to death. And yet, apparently, David does nothing. David's angry. That's kind of an interesting point. David's angry. And what does David do about it? Well, the answer is David apparently sits on his hands and does nothing about it. And so Absalom Absalom won't say anything, doesn't say anything for good or evil. And he keeps his own counsel. Maybe, again, we don't know what's going on in Absalom's head. He may have been waiting for David to make a move. He may have been letting this situation kind of ferment, if you will, to his own advantage, because he is, Amnon is the first in line for the throne, and Absalom is second. And so he may have been sort of fermenting things along to take advantage of the situation for his own advancement. Verse 23, it came about after 2 full years. Now, again, think of the time frame here. 2 full years have passed, and nothing has been done. Nothing has happened. After 2 full years, Absalom had sheep shearers in Baal Hazor, which is near Ephraim, and Absalom invited all the king's sons. And Absalom came to the king and said, "Behold now, your servant has sheep shearers. Please let the king and his servants go with your servant." But the king said to Absalom, "No, my son, we should not all go, lest we be burdensome to you." Although he urged him, he would not go, but blessed him. Then Absalom said, "If not, please let my brother Amnon go with us." And the king said, "Why should he go with you?" And when Absalom urged him, he let Amnon and all the king's sons go with him. And Absalom commanded his servants, saying, "See now, when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say to you, strike Amnon, then put him to death. Do not fear, have not I myself commanded you? Be courageous and be valiant." And the servants of Absalom did to Amnon just as Absalom commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and each mounted his mule and fled. This plot takes 2 full years to unfold. Absalom is perhaps waiting for David to take action. He knows what's been done. Apparently the whole family knows what Amnon has done, and David is taking no action against Amnon. He's doing nothing. So Absalom basically goes with what I guess we would call vigilante justice. It's like, well, if you're not going to enforce the law, I will. And so he conspires with his servants to put Amnon to death. Why does Absalom want the king to attend? Why does he want the king and all the king's sons to attend? Well, there's a lot of reasons. Scholars speculate about a number of reasons why this might have been. Why Absalom might have wanted the king there, why Absalom would have wanted the king's sons there. One idea is that Absalom intended to put them all to death. He was going to kill David, he was going to kill the whole royal line, and he'd be king. Okay, he'd be able to step up as king at that point. And so that becomes part of the idea. I'm not sure I go with that, though. I'm not sure I buy that idea. Because if Absalom was going to kill everybody, he would have plotted to kill everybody. And no, he was intending apparently to kill only Amnon. So why is he going to kill Amnon? Well, perhaps he's going to kill Amnon before David as a claim of justice. Look, I'm killing Amnon because you won't do it. And therefore, I'm taking that leadership role that you should have taken, David, and showing it to the whole family. See, I'm willing to take on this task. It's an unpleasant task, but somebody's got to do it, and I'm doing it. We see that David, Amnon's asking him, but we see David is suspicious. David's kind of got some sense that not everything is right here. Something's going on here, and not everything is as it seems. And so we see here that as he says here, he said, you see his excuse. He says, "No, I don't want to go because I don't want to be a burden to you." Okay, if I come along with my whole entourage of counselors and whatever that would have gone with the king, it would have been a lot for you to have to take to house us, to feed us, to take care of us. It's too much. And David's probably got a pretty good argument there. But then when Absalom wants to bring all the king's sons, and you see, here's David, and he especially wants Amnon, and you see the king ask him, why should Amnon be there? And you notice that Absalom doesn't give him a response. Absalom just keeps kind of pestering him, begging him, saying, come on, let Amnon come to my. This would have been a feast time. This would have been a big celebration. You remember, of course, back when David had been on the run from Saul, that Nabal had the big feast as his sheep shearers were shearing the sheep, and they were having a big feast. This was a party. This was a time of Thanksgiving. This was a big festival for them at the sheep shearing time. This was, basically the time when they're receiving the bounty of the work that had been done, and it was intended to be a festive time. And so he's trying to get David, come on and let Amnon come to the party, come to the festival. And David's suspicious, and rather than give him an answer of why do you want Amnon there, Absalom just kind of keeps pestering David, come on and let Amnon come, until David finally relents and lets him go. But as you see there, when he gets there, you got to ask yourself too, what's Amnon thinking? What's Amnon, what's his viewpoint of all of this? Here's this brother, your half brother, you've raped his sister, and yet, now my half brother, whose sister I raped, is inviting me to a party. Should I go? Why, yes, of course I should go. You're kind of going, are you stupid? Are you really that dense that you have no sense of danger? You have no sense of well, of course, again, 2 years has gone by. 2 years has gone by, and Amnon basically is thinking, well, okay, well, what's behind me is behind me. It's kind of like that move on organization. Well, we'll just move on from that, and we'll just ignore what's happened, and we'll pretend it never did happen. And here he is. Now he goes again. He's raped his half sister, and now he's going calmly to this feast held by her brother. And you're going, you kind of shake your head and going, did you just kind of wake up stupid this morning? You really have to wonder what he's really thinking about in doing this. Absalom, of course, it says here, he directs his servants to help him murder Amnon, but he takes full responsibility. He takes full responsibility. He says, strike him down, put him to death. He says, do not fear. Have I not myself commanded you? He's taking full responsibility. He's going, you're doing this at my order. You're doing this at my instruction. And of course, the other brothers, upon seeing this, they all, they're going, hey, if we're assassinating king's sons, I'm out of here. And jump on their mules and they take off. This would have been the fastest transportation they would have had. They jump on their mules, they get out of there. And it is not perhaps beyond their imagination to think that Absalom would have been willing to put them all to death. I mean, that's sort of how these Oriental kingdoms worked anyway, is that if you were, one of the lesser officials and you wanted to be the top official, why, you killed everybody else in the line. And suddenly you became, the number one guy. And they undoubtedly would have thought that's what exactly Absalom's got planned here. This isn't perhaps just revenge. This is political ascension. This was a time, not necessarily time honored, but time tested means of political ascension. You get rid of all your rivals, and suddenly you're the number one guy. And so they jump on their animals and they get out of there. They get out of Dodge. David learns of this in verse 30. It says, now while they were on their way, that the report came to David saying, Absalom has struck down all the king's sons and none of them is left. Now, we got to wonder, what David's thinking. First of all, he's got to be thinking about Nathan's prophecy, the sword will never depart from your house. He gets this report that all your sons are dead. Now, where would that report have come from? And the answer, we don't, you can imagine the confusion that takes place during, in the immediate aftermath of an assassination. Unfortunately, we've seen that even some of us within our own lifetimes, when President Kennedy was assassinated, when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, when we've seen other prominent leaders be assassinated, and suddenly there's mass confusion. And so you can imagine the rumors that would have been ripping around this place. And one of the rumors ripping around is that, oh my gosh, Absalom's killed all the sons. He's killed all your sons, David. And it says, then the king tore his clothes and lay on the ground, and all of his servants standing by with clothes torn. Of course, this tearing of clothes was a sign of grief. It was a sign of tremendous personal turmoil. And so David, of course, thinking all of his lineage is dead, now is wondering what he's going to do. Says, then Jonadab, the son of Shemaiah, David's brother, responded, said, do not let my lord suppose they have put to death all the young men, the king's sons, for Amnon alone is dead because of the intent of Absalom. This has been determined since the day he violated his sister Tamar. Now, therefore, do not let the Lord my king, my lord, the king, take it to heart. Namely, all the king's sons are dead, for only Amnon is dead. How does Joab have this information? How does Joab know this? The idea is that Joab may have been privy to the assassination. It seems kind of funny that Joab seems to be playing, whatever role mostly benefits himself during this time. That being that, first he was helping Amnon. He was advising Amnon on how to get himself alone with Tamar. And now he's apparently in cahoots with Absalom concerning the assassination of Amnon. And so Joab is apparently some guy who's finds himself, involved in a number of court intrigues. And it kind of makes you wonder something about his character. But he advises David, no, they're not all dead. Only Amnon, and Amnon's dead because Absalom's put him to death. It says, now Absalom fled. And the young man who was the watchman raised his eyes and looked, and behold, many people were coming from the road behind him on the side of the mountain. And Jonadab said to the king, behold, the king's sons have come according to your servant's word. So it happened. And it came about as soon as he had finished speaking that, behold, the king's sons came and lifted up their voices and wept, and also the king and all his servants wept very bitterly. Now Absalom fled and went to Talmai, the son of Ammihud, the king of Geshur. And David mourned for his son every day. So Absalom had fled and gone to Geshur and was there 3 years. And the heart of David longed to go out to Absalom, for he was comforted concerning Amnon, since he was dead. Yeah. And so, there's a lot of odd emotions, tied up in these verses here. Here comes the king's sons. They're coming down the road from where they had been. They come back in, and so David realizes that Jonadab is correct, that yes, not all my sons have been killed, just Amnon has been killed. But still, we see that the king's sons, they start weeping over the death of their brother. David weeps bitterly, it says. But again, we see David weeping. Yes, he's undoubtedly sorrowful over the death of his firstborn. But we also see that. We might also wonder, is he also realizing he's brought this on his own family? He's brought this into his own house. His actions with Bathsheba, his actions with Uriah have brought this into his own house. And now because of his actions, his firstborn son is dead, and so we can see that grief. Uh, yes, Irene. With this situation, well, David was supposed to do something about it. That was the point. Pardon? Yeah, if he had done something about it, what would have been? How might the outcome have been different? But the fact is that David didn't do. 2 years have passed, and nothing has been done. That's the key thing we kind of figure we see here is that after 2 years, nothing had been done. We see Absalom. Now Absalom flees to Geshur. Geshur is ruled by Talmai, who is his maternal grandfather. So he goes and runs off to this kingdom of Geshur to hide out, basically to hide out. And it was an area that was sort of northeast of the Sea of Galilee in modern day, I think that's modern day Jordan or Syria. And so he's hiding out there with his grandfather. He's beyond David's reach. And so basically it's good riddance. But we see the behavior of David. We see it here in verse 37. David mourned for his son every day. Well, which son? Well, apparently it's Absalom. He's sad not on account of Amnon, but on account of Absalom. So Absalom fled and gone to Geshur and was there 3 years. So again, now 3 years he's in Geshur. The heart of King David longed to go out to Absalom, for he was comforted concerning Amnon since he was dead. Well, who comforted him? I don't know. Maybe it was, after 3 years, it's like, well, he's dead and there's nothing to be done there. But I really wish I could see Absalom again. It's kind of an odd behavior, in my mind, an odd behavior on the part of David. It says something of David's affection that he has for his family, but also his complete lack of any sense of justice, any sense of doing the right thing regarding his family. No, I did not. Where do you see that? Yeah, I don't see that in my translation. In this. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, I was not aware. I was not aware of that. Well, yeah, I did point out that his opening question to Tamar suggested that he basically his only question was, did Amnon do this? And it may have been, or did little Amnon do this? And it may be that little Amnon has a reputation. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It might have been insulting. Yeah, it was undoubtedly meant to be insulting. Um, and as Matthew Henry comments on this and says, as time wears, and finally he says, time wore off David's grief for Amnon, but it also wore off entirely too much his detestation of Absalom's terrible sin. We tend to we tend to get this mentality. People do tend to get this mentality. Well, that happened in the past, and the past was long ago, and therefore I don't have to worry about it. And not so. Not so. The guilt remains. The guilt was still there. The guilt and the lack of justice was still there. And so David here, there also may have been there may have been a number of factors at play here. There may have been the fact that David fully realizes that he was responsible for doing something about this. He really was. He was responsible for doing something about this situation, and he didn't. And undoubtedly there may have been some guilt about that David had. That, yes, I should have done something about this. I let this thing sit. I let this thing go, and this is the result of it. Yes, it does. It does imply that Absalom has a lot of influence on David. And I think that's the case. I think that there is some suggestion in the text, there is some suggestion from the Bible scholars who look at this that suggest that, yeah, Amnon's the firstborn, but Absalom's kind of a favorite son. And that David looked very favorably more favorably on Absalom than he did on Amnon. And yeah, Amnon may have been something of a scoundrel, something of a cad, and that reputation gets around, whereas Absalom may have not had that reputation. All right, let's go into chapter 14 then. It says, now Joab, the son of Zeruiah, perceived that the king's heart was inclined toward Absalom. So Joab sent to Tekoa and brought a wise woman from there and said to her, please pretend to be a mourner and put on mourning garments now, and do not anoint yourself with oil, but like a woman who has been mourning for the dead many days. Then go to the king and speak to him in this manner. So Joab put the words in her mouth. Now when the woman of Tekoa spoke to the king, she fell on her face onto the ground and prostrated herself and said, help, O king. And the king said to her, what is your trouble? And she answered, truly I am a widow, for my husband is dead. And your maidservant had 2 sons, but the 2 of them struggled together in the field, and there was no one to separate them, so one struck the other and killed him. Now behold, the whole family has risen against your maidservant, and they say, hand over the one who struck his brother, that we may put him to death for the life of his brother whom he killed, and destroy the heir also. Thus they will extinguish my coal which is left, which is to leave my husband neither a name nor remnant on the face of the earth. So Joab gets involved. We don't know what Joab's exact motivation is, but clearly he finds that he wants to get involved. He wants Absalom to come back. David might have done better if he had just said, okay, Absalom's gone. He's in exile in Geshur, and let's leave him there. Let's just leave him there. He can just live out his life there, and he's outside of my jurisdiction. He's outside of my control, and I'll just leave him there. But David's one of David's great weaknesses is he's got an excessive fondness for his children, and he combines that, though, with a failure to properly discipline them. He won't sit on them when they need to be sat on. And we find some of this reflected, you see these writings probably from Solomon, who would have been a witness to a lot of this. In Proverbs, though, we're familiar with these passages, I suspect. Proverbs 19, verses 25 to 27. Strike a scoffer, and the naive may become shrewd, but reprove one who has understanding, and he will gain knowledge. He who assaults his father and drives his mother away is shameful and a disgraceful son. Cease listening, my son, to discipline, and you will stray from the words of knowledge. And then over in chapter 22 and verse 6, says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is not old, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And we're familiar with these passages. We're familiar with how this works. And it was clear that David was failing to do that for his sons. He was failing to raise up his children in a good way. Like I said, Joab is probably helping Absalom because Absalom is heir to the throne. Now that Amnon's dead, Absalom's next in line. And Joab, of course, has still got the fact that he murdered Abner over his head. And is fearful perhaps of that retribution. And so he thinks he'll back Absalom and kind of protect himself that way. We find here he conspires with this woman to come in and tell this story. It's interesting that it kind of points out to us that just as in the days of Paul, in the New Testament time, Paul had the right to demand to have an audience with Caesar. If he's charged with a crime, he has a right to be charged to have an audience with Caesar. Apparently, the Israelites of this time had a right to ask to come before the king. And you see the story that she tells, and it's a very neat duplication of the story of David's, well, really more of Absalom's situation. It really is kind of a neat duplication. And the implication is here, well, look, I got one son who's dead, and if they kill the other son, then where am I going to be? What good is it going to do? We even in our own time, we hear this kind of logic from those who are opposed, for example, to the death penalty. Well, if that person's dead, what good does it do to put the other person to death? You're not going to bring back the one who's dead, and so why should we be putting the one person to death? And that's her logic here. That's her argument here. And instead, in fact, by putting him to death, you're going to do great harm. Notice, however, that the woman sort of very skillfully omits any sense of justice for the dead son, for the son who's been murdered. There's no sense of justice here. There's only a sense of, oh, look at the consequences of if I lose both my sons, look what happens to me. And so we kind of follow, we find people falling for this kind of logic all the time, where it's like, oh, let's not look at what's happened. Let's not consider what has happened in the past in the sense of justice. Let's only consider about the ramifications, about the impacts to the future, and what that might mean for us in the future. And let's not take care of what's been done. Let's instead just kind of whitewash over that and continue on. All right, I think I'm going to stop there today. That's actually a little over time. So I'm going to stop there, and we will continue on with chapter